Welcome to All Bodies on Bikes, the podcast, where all bodies are good bodies, all bikes are good bikes, and all rides should be celebrated.
All Bodies on Bikes is a movement to create and foster a size-inclusive bike community. So join your hosts, I'm Maggie.
And I'm Marley.
As we explore the complexities of the biking world, help us break down barriers and create the world that we want to see. And don't forget that all bodies really means all bodies, not just larger bodies, but bodies of all sizes, ages, races, abilities, genders, sexualities, and beyond.
Come along for the ride. Hey, good morning, Vanessa. Thank you so much for joining us on the All Bodies on Bikes podcast. Really excited to have you here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is exciting.
It is exciting. We got to hang out a couple weeks ago in Bentonville, and I had known about you. We had kind of crossed paths in brief at a couple of different events, but and we'll get into this during the show, I had the opportunity to learn from you, which really made me think, okay, we need to get this person on the show. But before we dive in too deep, let me introduce you to the podcast audience. So today on the All Bodies on Bikes podcast, we have Vanessa Bowen. Vanessa Bowen, they, them, is a Diné, also known as Navajo, product designer with a passion for cycling. Their creative focus centers on the juncture of design and social equity. Vanessa Bowen, I don't like calling you by your last name. Your thing says Bowen, but I like...
Yeah, it's like my friend wrote me a little bio. So
I love it.
Like, it's like the way they refer to someone else without repeating themselves, apparently.
Yeah, it just feels weird to say. Okay, back to bio. Vanessa serves as an Outride Ambassador, spearheads the Get Native Kids on Bikes initiative, and actively supports the AIDS LifeCycle ride. When not immersed in their Albuquerque studio, they dedicate their time to cycling training and fostering community connections for a fair and inclusive future. Welcome to the show, Vanessa.
Yes, I'm so excited. Yes, please bring on the questions.
So your bio, I feel like, gave us a little teaser, but I would love to hear in your own words, who are you? Tell the audience who you are.
Yeah, so I always like to start saying I'm an artist first. That's really how I got my start in my career. I was a painter and illustrator, turned into a graphic designer, and not to date myself, but I grew up during the time where Alta Vista existed and MySpace, so I got into coding and programming. So that kind of followed through into where I am now in the tech space. So I'm a product designer. I basically design like enterprise SaaS and mobile apps and such. But yeah, I've been a lifelong cyclist ever since I was a young kid. I rode my bike on res dirt roads, and that passion has followed me into adulthood, and I feel like it's my escape. And a little known fact is that I have ADHD, and I find that cycling is like a great way to treat ADHD, and I cannot recommend it enough if you are a person with a neurodivergent, like if you have ADHD like myself.
Yeah, I feel like we could do an entire episode on how cycling has helped me personally with my ADHD. So I relate deeply to that. Also, I love the throwback to Alta Vista and MySpace.
Yes.
So I was always a very lazy MySpacer. Like I, maybe would put up like a flashing glittery banner and then I would forget about it for 3 months and never update my top 8. Were you like an active MySpacer? And
I was, because I grew up during the time when I guess I was like an early club kid, if you will. So being on top of, events and who is who, I started graphic design gigs as creating posters for my friends who were promoters. So yeah, I had to be active. And I guess, it was kind of like the start of social media, if you will. So yeah, really fun.
Dang. Actually, I say this a lot, but I just got chills thinking about that because I think about, the early days of social media. That is where we heard about things, and it's kind of wild to think about how we all found out about these events before it was just like in our face and on our phones all the time. But That's really cool. I love that you've carried
Yeah.
that into adulthood and really kind of built on those skills.
Yes.
Um, well, let's talk about bikes a little bit more. So you mentioned that you've been doing it since you were a kid, and I did some like Instagram stalking. Um, maybe it was
Yeah.
your website, but you got your first bike at 5, I believe.
Yeah, it was my fifth birthday, and my parents bought me this like pink coffee bike, and my dad set it up. I was so eager to get on it because I have older sisters. I'm the youngest of six. So when I finally got my bike that would fit me and only me, that was like the best day of my life.
Yeah. Oh man, I remember riding my older siblings and friends' bikes and not being able to reach the pedals. So yeah, that's a huge thing. And you mentioned that you were riding it on the reservation. Can you tell us about how your identity as an Indigenous person, as a Diné, Navajo person, has shaped your experiences, both in life and on the bike?
Yeah, so honestly, I felt as if I was, I grew up in such a tight-knit community where everyone around me was Navajo. So honestly, I don't know if it's like naive of me to say, but I honestly thought like the world was like all Navajo, if you will. Because there wasn't really like a need to talk about anything beyond like your family, your community, you know? And so I, I was, I had this like bit of like culture shock, if you will, because unfortunately I almost lost my mom when I was like soon after my birthday.
I'm
She got in a
sorry.
horrible car accident and she was in the hospital for it seemed like forever. But growing up there and then of course being Navajo, I realized like once I had to move away from home to have my older sister care for me, I had to go to Phoenix, Arizona. And then I realized like, oh wow, like I am a minority. Like that really like hit me like, whoa, oh my God, like it was such a shock. But I feel as if because I grew up in such like a cultural space, you know, I felt very close to the land and there was nothing that I loved more than that, you know, because it was just a rather simple way of living. We didn't have like riches, if you will. So like being able to go explore and ride my bike and, you know, really be a part of it and, you know, climb those climbs and feel the earth. Like, yeah, there's like a deeper connection, I feel like, to land if as like an indigenous person.
Yeah, it's a different from everything that I've learned and read, and I by no means of an expert on this, but I have learned so much just about the way that my I'm a white woman, our relationship and the way that we think about the land is so different. And I think we could learn a lot we 100% could learn a lot from indigenous cultures. I recently learned about the concept of reciprocity to the land, where it's okay to, to build a fire or to harvest stuff, but how are you giving back? And how are you thanking the land for that? So, just something I've been thinking about a lot, especially as I ride bikes, and kind of get out into these more natural, um, I don't know, unfucked with places, I guess is the
Yes.
best way to say it.
Yeah, yeah, and there's like a deeper connection, I feel like, because you know, my family, like the elders, they would live in remote places deep in the Navajo Nation, and their floors were like just straight dirt, you know, their homes were hogans as we call them, and so they're just made straight from the earth. So, you know, there's not really that disconnection that we often have in the modern world. Like you are living it, you are thriving in on the earth, you know. So I feel like that's like a really big prominent takeaway that I have just as a Navajo person.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. So you were recently in Bentonville, at the People for Bikes Shift conference, and I had the pleasure of attending the talk that you gave, with a couple other Indigenous folks. And it was, I forget the exact title. It was, I think, the benefits and drawbacks to recreating on tribal land. And
Yes.
I learned a ton. But for the podcast listeners who weren't able to go to that session, can you tell us, what that was about, what you talked about? What do we need to know about recreating on tribal lands, especially riding bikes?
Yeah, I feel as if not many people know that, for instance, what is it, the Great Divide, you know, it goes down from north to south, mostly through the Southwest and such. But many riders don't see or know that they are actually entering into tribal lands. I feel as if being an Indigenous person, we're often fighting against erasure. A lot of people don't realize that we are still here. Sometimes it's a culture shock to others. Like when I moved to Massachusetts when I was super young, a lot of people thought we were like figments of the past, because everything was like in a historical context there on the East Coast. But as you go west, there's more, for me, like the Navajo tribe, we're the largest. And so you can't miss us, like we are here living embodiments of, we are Native people, but, I feel like there's not that understanding broadly that we're not that historical chief figure that's in the black and white tintype, that we are actually living, breathing, and still thriving. So having that talk at Shift 23 and just talking about recreation on tribal lands, it's super important because one, yes, we are still here. Two, we need to make connections with tribal communities because believe it or not, they're around. And a really cool thing was soon after Bentonville, I went straight to this American Indian Science and Engineering Society conference up in Spokane. And I met the Apple Maps team. And in my presentation at Shift, I took a screen capture of something called the checkerboard. That's where I grew up. And basically, back in 1887, the Dawes Act was passed, where it basically tried to take trust land that Indigenous people live on and convert it into like more private property. But people, like most Native people, weren't prepared to like take on the taxes and etc. So a lot of like land loss occurred at that time. So like it transferred, and so now there's this mixed use land that exists. And if you look at a map, it does look like a checkerboard, but at ACES, I met the Apple Maps team and I was able to tell them like, hey, your work that you've done, because they've been working hard on putting in more Indigenous representation and boundary lines within the Apple experience. So you'll notice that. So I encourage everyone to like just go into Apple. I think Google Maps even has it, but you could see nearby tribal nations, which is really rad. But yeah, it will just kind of give you like an indication of, well, who's who and what, So I feel like that's like a big point is like a lot of like the cycling industry should, make connections and reach out and with the tribal communities around. And also I did share like a big fact in my talk was about a fact was 80% of the world's biodiversity is held within indigenous lands, and we make up, less than, I think it was 15% of the world's population. So that's quite shocking. And so literally Native people are stewards of the land. And so if, and I feel like we should advocate for Indigenous people, preservations of sacred sites, etc. So yeah, it's like really important. And just know that, we should all work together to preserve our, our earth, because climate change is real and we're facing the effects now. And so, yeah, it's super, super important.
Thank you. Yeah. Your talk really opened my eyes. Especially with the checkerboard example and what you were just talking about. That erasure and that land loss, I think was honestly probably intentional. They knew that folks weren't set up to pay taxes, because from everything I understand, like land ownership isn't really a concept for a lot of indigenous communities.
Yeah.
It's a communal thing. We don't own this land. We take
Yeah.
care of it. We steward it, and it's here for generations forward.
Yes.
And so it's just something I've been thinking about a lot. I live in Arkansas, but drive through Oklahoma frequently, and we go through, the Muskogee Nation and a couple of other nations. And I just think about, how could these bike events or gravel events just do better? I think, does it start with awareness? Do you have any suggestions for those of us who are recreating? Like, is it just an awareness piece, or is it more than that?
Yeah, I feel like it's awareness for sure, because that's a way to educate. Secondly, realizing that, cycling can be inaccessible. Like, honestly, for me, even it's a stretch. I have to budget for it. So, like, putting action behind those words, like provide those free events, passes, or like even these amazing travel stipends. So, I was a fortunate recipient of like the Mid-South Get Here grant last year or this year. And oh gosh, it just seems like forever
I know it
ago.
feels like last
Yeah.
year.
Yeah,
It was
no, this
only
year.
in March of
Yeah.
23. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot has happened since then. But, just putting action behind words because yeah, like cycling is a luxury, quite honestly. The price of the bike, the maintenance, there's just so much like cost to it. So at the very least, make that like a point, like just throw the money at it. Like there's no, land acknowledgements are nice and great, but just, that action just speaks louder. And yeah, teaming up with your tribal community, like knowing what their wants, their needs, their goals are and help support. And just like, the problem I find, like even working with nonprofits, being a board member and also trying to run my own little nonprofit, it's really hard to get capital because you have to get those reports that really take away from the actual work. So it's like, can we not do this? Like, can you just like give the money? And I feel like that's the biggest complaint I hear from everyone who is like in venture capital. It's like there's so many hoops you have to jump through just to get just a few drops of money. So yeah, yeah. I could go into a big tangent, but I'll refrain.
Maybe that's a separate conversation because we
Yes.
are also jumping through those hoops now as all bodies on bikes. And it does create a barrier, especially
Yeah.
when the work that you're trying to do is so urgent.
Yeah.
Well, let's jump into that. You are, I believe, spearheading the Get Native Kids on Bikes initiative. And I feel like you teased this a little bit about how cycling um, is such a privilege. And so you're trying to, like you said, get Native kids on bikes. Can you tell me about that initiative and what you're trying to do with that?
Yeah, so I dove in as a product designer using design thinking, user experience, etc. So big passion is like I thought of myself as a kid, like for to be able to get a bike or even let alone afford it would just seem impossible sometimes. So I decided to pursue more bike mechanics. I got my certification from the U of Q Institute, but RIP because they're no longer here. But I was able to like learn amazing skills and wherever I can, I go and build bikes for the community. If someone needs their bike fixed, I'll like assist because that is such a barrier for most people. They can't maintain their bikes. And there are many amazing organizations across the Navajo Nation, for instance, like we have Silver Stallion, we have Si Hassan Bike Project, we have Navajo Yes, like these are great organizations. But I find like people do throw they give them the bikes, but yet what's missing is the sustainable ecosystem that is needed. I find that I need to go out there and I need to teach others how to maintain bikes, because that's like a missing component. And that's what I would like to see is just like this ecosystem that will continue to care for and, just keep cycling like at the forefront within communities. So I came in thinking, okay, I could use my bike mechanic certification and knowledge and teach as much as I can. So right now I just got a fiscal sponsorship. So that's been amazing. And
Congratulations.
thank you. And so now I'm just gonna spearhead and possibly partner with other organizations that already have curriculum. But my whole point is I want to add this edge of cultural perspective and incorporate cultural knowledge. Just like really instill in our students or the cycling participants like that level up for the land and yeah, I feel like that's like a super important component that is missing. So yeah, that's where I foresee this initiative going and how I could be of service to my community.
Yeah. And I noticed on your website that the Get Native Kids on Bikes initiative is using some knowledge that was gained through the Tribal Data Championship Fellowship. Um, can you can you tell me about that? Was that like a data research project, and how did that influence the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so I was thankful to get a fellowship through the University of New Mexico for the Tribal Data Champion Fellowship basically they helped us gain more like data analysis or research methodologies, but more or less it's like indigenous research methodologies. And how can we go into the community, ask the right questions, use the data to, inform our next steps forward, but also, taking our data, and treating it at the like with the most ethical ways of like handling it and doing good and right by our community. So that was an amazing like 1 year long fellowship. And if anyone is out there who's native or indigenous, like definitely go seek it out because yeah, I learned so much through it and cannot recommend it enough. And that has helped me set the foundation in where Get Native Kids on Bikes is going.
Are you able to share any of your research findings or like, things that point out that stand out to you of like, okay, here's like a major gap in our
Yeah.
population. This is what getting Native kids on bikes will help accomplish. Do you have anything like
Yes.
that?
Yeah, so I first initially started out thinking, okay, I'm going to go in and I'm going to go get bikes and I'm going to hand them out, and that's how it initially started. But through the research, identifying other community organizations who are doing the work, it really highlighted that missing component of this like sustainable ecosystem that I spoke about and how we need to like reinvest into the community, teach these skills and knowledge, and then hopefully that could just build up other amazing bike mechanics and they could go out and help maintain bikes and such. So and I hope also it instills the love of cycling as well, because yeah, like biking out on the Navajo Nation, it's vast, it's beautiful. I cannot recommend it enough. It's so beautiful. But yeah, so some of the findings are just like, yeah, one, it's inaccessible. Two, like finding real estate space on the Navajo Nation is a problem. It just takes years to get something built. So even having like a storefront seems nearly impossible. So the option for like a mobile bike shop came into mind because then you're like kind of in and out, and then you could actually go to places that are more remote. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of driving, sadly, but I feel like it's important because yeah, that's like the only solution at this point. So yeah, a lot of research in the past, a lot of learnings. So yeah, I'm excited to actually get into the community and do more work. So just building those partnerships and trying to get all the events on the calendar, and hopefully that works with mine. Because as you know, I do races or events, and so yeah, it's a lot of juggling, but we'll get it figured out.
Yeah, it is a lot of juggling, but oh man, I love that so much because yeah, such a good point. I think a lot of orgs give out bikes and then there isn't that follow-up of, hey, I mean, bikes can be fairly low maintenance, but not always. Even just, let's keep your tires aired up so you're not getting flat tires. Let's make sure you know how to lube your chain, tighten your brakes, just, fairly basic things that are going to both enhance somebody's experience, but also keep them safe.
Yeah,
So I really love that had this idea and then used the research to kind of reevaluate. And I think that's a huge learning for every nonprofit, or every org. We all set out with one objective in mind and then making sure we step back and evaluate. So thanks for sharing that.
yeah,
Um,
definitely.
so you're also involved in a million other things. You mentioned some of the
Yeah.
races and events that you do. One of the things that stood out to me on your Instagram was that you're involved in the AIDS LifeCycle ride. We had a couple guests on a couple months ago. We will put a link to that in the bio, that episode in the bio where they talk extensively about it. But I would love to hear about your experience, what draws you to that ride and that community, why it's important. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so as a non-binary person, and I feel like I really stepped into this identity recently because I've always felt that growing up. The cool thing about our Navajo culture is that, we don't have the binary gender. We have more than that. So it just fit well, but I never really had the word to quite describe it. My if you met any of my friends or family, they would say it was such a tomboy growing up. But I don't think it was really tomboy. I think it was just more or less like being comfortable being both masculine and feminine,
Sure.
or neither, or just being me. So I kind of never really fell into those like gender role or, you know, presenting a certain way because of how you identify. Like it never really mattered to me. So being non-binary has been more of the forefront and I embrace it because yeah, I feel most comfortable there. So as a queer person, and also a little known fact is that I DJ. I don't DJ as much as I used to, because, you know, just life in general. But I love like Detroit techno, Chicago house, and if the blacker and or queer it is, the better. So a lot of my community is in that space and they just love me and have brought me on this journey of like healing, and it's been super amazing and I will not trade it for anything. So I also wanted to, you know, support in other ways than just being a part of that community. So a friend of mine, his name is Aaron Clark, he spearheads this like Pittsburgh crew called Honcho, and he just invited me to do AIDS LifeCycle because he would see my stories of just like cycling nonstop. And so he's like, you would be great here. So I looked into it and I kind of did my own research and kind of seeing what like how these organizations impact Indigenous communities. There wasn't much there, but you know, there's a deeper problem that is present. It's basically they call it data surveillance. So data surveillance is basically getting into the nitty gritty of details instead of saying, are you Hispanic or non-Hispanic? They don't like collect more of the finer details of like you're not or what are you, you know, they don't go into the details of like which tribal affiliation are you. So
Mm,
therefore it really misses information on how to track Indigenous people. So on data it would say like, oh, it doesn't affect Indigenous peoples, but it's actually quite opposite because we are impacted by public health issues like way far greater than you'd realize. But since we don't track it, it's hard to tell. So then that also proves to this like concept of Indigenous erasure. So my whole point was doing this ride to not only honor members of my community who have passed from AIDS or HIV, but also to push like this importance of we need to do better at data surveillance. And then also as I do the ride, I would say I'm in the land of the Chumash, you know, or you know whatever, like there's like so many amazing tribal nations that we pass through and people have no idea. And so my whole point in that was just to bring it to the forefront, be there in person and you know talk to people and just like build that awareness. So yeah, that was like the whole point of AIDS LifeCycle. I'm going to do it again next year, looking forward to it. And if you haven't tried it or looked into it, I highly recommend it. Like, you know, they're doing the good work and it's really impacting, you know, it's doing that positive work. And I feel like that's super important.
yeah. We will have a link to your fundraising page in the
Yay.
bio, and we will put a link to it on the Instagram stories because every rider has to raise $3,500.
Yes.
Um, we typically get 500 or so downloads per episode. If everybody
Cool.
donated $5, that would get you a big chunk of the way there. Um, so we will put a link to Vanessa's fundraising in there. But oh man, you raised so many good points about data erasure and data
Mhm.
collection and public health. And I know, especially, I'm about to say the O slur, the obesity slur. I
Mhm.
hate that word. We haven't
Mhm.
talked about it much on the show, but Indigenous communities are also impacted by um, body size issues and
Yep.
access to clean water and whole foods and clean air and just every public health issue imaginable impacts Indigenous communities. And I think you raise an amazing point about the data gaps around it. So thank you for doing the hard work around that.
Yes.
Um, yeah. Oh gosh. Okay. So coming kind of towards the end of our conversation, although I could legitimately talk to you all day.
Yes.
Um, so you mentioned that you've got some races and events coming up. So in addition to like all the on the ground work that you're doing for your community and for your tribe, you're also doing some stuff, I wouldn't say for yourself, but some like more, I don't know, individual challenges. What's on your plate for next year? What have you got going on?
Yeah. So shout out to my coach, Shayna Palace. She's amazing. She literally has worked with, I was on the couch literally, and I was like, okay, I need to do something because I just recently got my ADHD diagnosis. So I wanted to get back into something because I remember when I was younger, that was the one thing that really made me like, get my head on right, if you will. So my plan for next year is to do the same sort of events that I have been doing. I do want to go to Mid-South. I
You have some
don't want to get
redemption there.
injured. I don't want to get injured again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
You gotta,
I fractured my ankle and I was on crutches for 8 weeks.
oh,
Yeah, it was crazy. But yeah, I want to do that again. I want to do Foco Fondo again, a big one that I'm really thrilled about. Not only am I going to do the AIDS life cycle, but the next following month I'll do the West Fjord Way Challenge. I just
tell us more about that because that is a huge challenge.
Oh my gosh. Well, they haven't announced it yet. So I don't know if you want to like redact this part, but I got the scholarship to go. And so they gave me the scholarship and they're gonna pay for, part of the flight over. And I'm
To
gonna take
Iceland,
the
right?
opportunity, yeah, to Iceland. And I'm gonna do it because it's, closer to 600 miles, but doing AIDS life cycle, I feel like that 545 I'm like, oh, mentally I could do this, and that's cool because AIDS life cycle, they always say like it's a ride, not a race. And so that's kind of the same mentality I'm going to take. Like you don't have to be that super crazy competitive athlete all the time, and I don't know why everyone always feels like that's the only way you can validate yourself as a cyclist sometimes, but I'm like, yeah, it's a ride, not a race. That's the same mentality I'm going to take. I'm going to enjoy it. And the cool thing about West Fjord Way Challenge is that they have cultural stops. And so I just want to have this like culture exchange that occurs between us. And I would love to learn more. I'm super thrilled. Yeah, I'm going to take it one day at a time, one pedal stroke at a time. But I know I'm going to do it with that mentality. So yeah,
Oh, I love that. You've got some exciting things coming up for sure.
yes.
One question I thought about, you had mentioned earlier riding on the Navajo Nation. Do you have any routes that we can link to in the show notes that you would recommend for folks who might be in that part of the country and looking for a ride?
Yes, I do. I have several rides and routes. I could give you a Strava link. And also to back that up, Navajo Yes is like the recreation organization on the Navajo Nation. And they also have different race series. So if you're a mountain biker, road biker, etc., there are routes that they have, and you could come through and race those events as well. So if you want to, have like a more supported or, like a group ride with everyone, I would recommend that. But yes, I will share those links.
Awesome. Thank you. And I will likely make them ride with GPS because Ride with
Okay,
GPS is a
there we
partner of
go.
All Bodies on Bikes. And
Okay, we could
um,
convert them.
yes, I love Strava for other reasons,
Yeah,
but when I am navigating, I'm a Ride with GPS girly.
there you go.
Yeah. So before we get into our final two questions that we ask every guest, is there anything else you want us to cover and anything else you want to talk about?
Oh, there's so much. I just, want to encourage everyone to take a moment to just, look at the map and see what other tribal nations are around you. Make an effort to go and see if there's like a cultural museum. You'll learn a lot there. Sometimes they like actually have like indigenous people run the museum that you could like talk to. And, it just takes like one person and making those connections. And I feel like that is like a good way to just get more understanding, and see how you can help. But yeah, that's all I have for now. But yeah, thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you so much. And so when kind of a additional question on that, I use nativeland .ca as my kind
Mhm.
of resource when I'm looking. Is that one that you would recommend?
Yes,
Do you have any other
definitely.
resources? Okay.
Yeah, I definitely recommend that. They do like a really good job at, identifying who's who in your area. So definitely recommend that. But, I find that now that Apple is doing like a great corporate responsibility of including land representation of indigenous tribes, like that's also another way. But yeah, uh yeah, nativeland.ca. Yes,
Cool.
is the one to go to.
Thank you. That is good to know. We will also have a link to that. And now I'm going to go research this Apple project because that sounds really, really cool.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, there was this native guy, his name's Marcus Yazzie. He's like Diné as well, but he was on that team to help with including the land representation.
Very cool. I'm definitely gonna go look that up. So yeah, so in closing, Vanessa, we have two questions that we ask every guest. The first is, what is your perfect day outside?
Whew, wow. So I'm kind of a baby, but if it's like perfect weather, like 70 degrees and it's, sunny, being from New Mexico, I love when there's not really a cloud in the sky, because you could look for miles and miles. That's usually my perfect day of riding, and it's just, a longer ride. Like I love doing 40 miles, just taking it all in and taking my time and stopping when I need and ending the ride with either a coffee or like a New Mexico burrito with green chili and red chili on top.
That sounds so good. I
Yes,
just read an article about the debate or the feud between New Mexico and Colorado about who
yes,
makes the best green chili.
yes.
Oh,
They're at odds, but I feel like New Mexico has the best chili. If you haven't had Hatch green chili from Hatch, New Mexico, you're missing out. And yeah, don't listen to Colorado. They, I mean, love them, but you know, green chili is kind of generational at this point, so you
mm,
can't touch it. You know what I mean? I don't
yeah,
know. Like
yeah. It's
maybe
like, yeah, totally. That's like
yeah,
somebody telling me to get matzo ball soup from a store. I'm like,
yeah, yeah,
like,
yeah,
no, this is
nuh-uh.
we make it at home. We don't,
Yes,
yeah. So,
yeah,
well, that's
yeah.
you heard it here,
All the
folks.
love, Colorado, all the love.
But get your green chili, your Hatch green chili in New Mexico.
Yeah.
And then the very last question, we had a wide-ranging conversation. We talked about research, we talked about bikes, we talked about nonprofit work. What else? Like, is there another topic that you wish people asked you about and you got to talk about more?
Ooh, geez, that's a good question. Well, I feel like anything indigenous, honestly, like I feel like a lot of people don't understand it really. Even talking to people when I say in Navajo, like that really just goes over their head. So I think when I had to be more specific and use like more common knowledge or language. Like I am Native American from the tribe, like I have to spell it out very specifically or explicitly. That's the only time then it kind of clicks of like, oh, because sometimes I feel like I do say I'm Navajo, but no one, it goes in one ear and out the other. So yeah, I feel like I wish people would talk to me more about that, or even just like even like the queerness within like the Navajo tribe and our culture. Like I feel like that's a really cool topic to discuss. And yeah, it just leads into this like idea and concept that you should be authentically you without any societal expectation because you are divinity incarnate. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it gets like really deeper. Like it's really amazing when it gets to that level because it's like you are celebrated for who you are and nothing more.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
I love that. And thank you. If folks do want to reach out and chat with you more about this, where can they find you?
They can find me on Instagram. My handle is at the Vanessa Bowen. Yeah, feel free to DM me, follow me. I look forward to hearing from everyone.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Vanessa, for your time. Thank you for your work getting Native kids on bikes, for
Yes.
educating us. I know it's not always the most joyful things to tell white people what's going on in the world, but really, really appreciate your time and your energy and what you're doing in the world.
Yeah,
So,
thank you.
yes, be well.
You too. Thank you, Marley. Have a good day.
You too.
This is an All Bodies on Bikes podcast powered by Feisty Media. The show is produced by Maggie and Marley and edited by the team at Feisty Media. Thanks for listening.